Hi gang, let's do scenario 2-2 again, but this time let's do it in C#. And this one involves trapping an error to keep the application running. Now, we've got a couple things we've got to do. We have to generate the exception itself. We're going to have to trap it or catch it. Store that value in some variable. We'll dispose of the exception or clear it. And then we have to pass that value that we've acquired from the exception. We have to pass it back to a web page and keep our system running. Now, with this, let's start out. I've got an empty web form. Dumped in my default, and you see I put a button on it. Still button 1. I changed the text. I call it throw error. I've also got my code behind in C# and a global ASAX file. Now the global ASAX file is because we're going to generate that exception, and the place we need to catch it is in our application error procedure. So let's open that up. So here it is. This procedure's just sitting there waiting, and as soon as an error gets thrown, this gets triggered. So the code that we're dealing with within this, we've had to generate the code because it would just normally be a comment code in there. We use server.getLastError, and it acquires the error that was thrown. We then store it in exception. Exception, if it's not null, then we're going to perform these tasks. First and foremost, we'll clear that error. And next, we're going to use the server.transfer to pass that value over to our default page. There we go, here it is, default ASPX. But the way we're passing it is with that question mark and these couple of words. The question mark indicates it's a query string. Param is the name that I'm giving this value that I'm passing over. And exception is the actual value, or what's stored in exception is the value. Okay, so this gets the error, puts it in a temporary variable for us, clears the error, and then sends it over to our default page via a query string. Okay, so that's our catching and returning the error. And we could have returned it anywhere. We could have sent it over to any page that we define. We could have created our own custom error page. But with this, let's go look at our code behind and see how we're handling it. On page load. Well, in the on page load, we're actually acquiring that query string with the request query string, and what we're requesting is param. Now, I want param, and I want to store it in my variable, string variable v. I ensure that there is in fact something in v with my conditional, and if there is something there, I'll display on the page using the response.write method. Param is, and then v. Now, how do we throw that error? Now, here's our click event for that button on our default page. Did a little bit different in VB. In C#, I'm going to use throw new, and we're going to use the system file, system.get argument exception. All right, here's our exception. We'll call it test exception. And that's what's going to get thrown to the system. The system catches that exception with that code that we created in global ASAX. Let's go ahead and run it and see how it acts. And I'll explain it as we're going through each of the steps. Now, let's launch an IE. It's actually generating the HTML code, and it's building our page for us. We've got our default.aspx file, and we're going to have that little button control here that'll say throw exception or throw error. Okay, throw error. Now, had there been a parameter passed in, had there been a query string passed in with something called param, when this page loaded, it would have displayed it. Since there was no query string, nothing got displayed. Throw an error. Right. So we triggered the error. Global ASAX, our application error event procedure, grabbed that error from the server, stored it in a variable, cleared it, and then passed it over in a query string. When this page loaded, param is, and then here's what we had in that variable. Okay. Tells the fact that it's an unhandled exception, the type of exception, where it took place. Here it is. It's a test exception. It took place at default button 1. Click event. Okay. Now, the fact that I used the server.transfer, we don't see that query string here. Server.transfer happens behind the scenes, so it still has the look and feel of the original page, when in fact the content of the page is different. Okay. So there we go. That's our page. If we reload it or retry, all right. It's still pulling it, and it's still pulling that. Now if I came up here and I just asked for default ASPX, I got the default ASPX file reloaded. That server transfer content is now gone. Right. Throw the error again. There's server transfer back in the back end of it. Okay. So that's it. That's a C# version of Scenario 2.2.